want to welcome you into another episode of the Idea Collision, the podcast where we kind of combine ideas together, try to come out with a spiritual thought, some guidance to leave you with something practical to improve your day, your week, and hopefully your life. And we're going to be kind of combining some thoughts as we talk about emotional health and some people call mental health, spiritual health, really. And but going back even to some of the different topics we've had and combining some thoughts from previous. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go back and listen to them, but does mean that if you go back and listen, you'll kind of get a deeper understanding of what we're going through, the material that I'm sharing with you, and theories, ideas that hopefully will help you. And we began the concept of identity last week. We talked about the IMA, what I call the IMA, the way we identify ourselves that determines kind of our direction in life. It determines our priorities and the rules that we make for ourselves and the principles that we make our decisions based upon. And as I say, I want to go back to one of our very early, I think I like our second podcast, third maybe, both of them, I don't know, but we talked about how generations affect others, and we're more interested in looking not so minutely at one individual here or one individual there, but how kind of we're a part of a whole, and that's important, I think, because we are made for a group, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today, and how generations affect each other, and specifically we've kind of talked about that throughout here, but how the family unit and how the breakdown of the family has affected things negatively, specifically how that happened. We are shaped, I would say, both incidentally and we are shaped intentionally. What I mean by that is that we are shaped we're shaped by the events that happen to us, the circumstances we're born in, things like that. Those are incidents. But we are also shaped by values that people put into us. There are a number of them. But let's look first of all at the events. We've talked a lot about this, where let's say I was born in a stable home. I would likely live in a safe area. I would likely be a little bit more affluent, not necessarily rich, but I would have more amenities, nicer house. I would therefore be probably in an environment where there was a good education system, right? Positive role models and all that, right? So that's going to affect the way I interpret life and I view life, my worldview and my view of myself. Whereas if you're not that, if you're born on the other end of the spectrum, right, you're going to have a different view of the world. You're going to have a different view of yourself. And all of these things are going to shape your identity, and those will determine the direction that you go in large part, not exclusively, because there's another area of life. And those are the rules and priorities that are instilled in you. Now, some of these you instill in yourself. As we've talked about, you respond to those situations and you come up with your own set of rules for yourself. But a lot of these values will be values that were put in you by sources all around you. Obviously, your parents or parent, whatever your role model is, whatever people are important to you when you're young, those people are heavily influenced or heavily influence you, in your value system. That only lasts really that aspect only lasts until you graduate from high school. After that, there's much less. You separate, you go to college. Well, so another area is. It's maybe not as significant, but it does last longer, would be the educators in your life. So because now you're going to go to college, you're going to go to get an associate's, you're going to get a bachelor's, you're going to get a master's, you're going to get the doctorates, right? You're going to have people influencing you, educators influencing you for another, anywhere from 2 to 8 years or 12 years, whatever. So Now, and if you think that educators don't have an agenda, which we're going to talk about agenda, education has always instilled a value system. There's people that think that there was a time where, educators only just taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's all they taught, and we should go back to that. But read some of the early primers, what they call the primers, where morals were instilled in the very teaching of the alphabet, where you had to recite phrases that the alphabet was used to teach morals, that the educators at that time thought were morals that you should have, not necessarily all of them bad, Um, so so teachers have always had, education systems have always had a virtue system and an agenda of teaching some type of virtue. Now, the virtues change as culture changes, but it's always been there. Well, so that lasts longer. But there's another source of instilling an agenda in you. And agenda is not a bad word, by the way. Agenda just means, what I want to accomplish. I have agendas for my kids. They don't always like those agendas, and they, tend to disagree. Your kid comes home from college, and he politely declines some of the agendas that you think, things that you think he should be doing, or she, I suppose. But in my case, a he, as I have one in college. And that's their right. They get to choose their own way. But agenda itself is not. It's just what I want to accomplish. And it's good to have an agenda, a thing you want to accomplish with your children. Well, even after education is over, you're going to have a media, whether it be news, whatever they're consuming. Social media has an agenda. Advertising, there's an agenda. Television programming, those people have agendas. They have goals of morals that they want to teach with whatever type of programming they're giving you. So, and these last much longer. These last until you die. Music that you listen to, the songs that you listen to, they have agendas that they're trying to teach you. So all of these things are inputs, and they affect the identity that you have, and they affect the priorities and principles that you will adopt as a part of your life. Right. So, and so one of the things that's happening is with all of this. And I want to talk about the family and emphasize the family today. And it seems strange that we should have to emphasize the role of family, but the fact is that there are people that would like to diminish the role of the family, and say, well, the traditional family unit is not what we call the traditional family unit. Some call it the nuclear family. Is not. It's not ideal. We should get rid of it. Now, I think probably those people, if we looked at it, are people who did not have access to a good, stable home and are maybe a little bit envious of people who did. And so, therefore, would just kind of like to blow the whole thing up. That's my guess. I haven't really researched that out. But I bet I would find that. But we do need to underscore, and I want to observe a little bit of how this has happened, how the decline has affected people in different ways, and specifically with reference to our identity. Family has two vital aspects, probably more than that, but I want to look at two, and they affect genders differently. Now, everything that's in a family is necessary for all genders. That's absolutely true. But when there's something missing, I think, as a generality, not an exclusive without exception, but as a generality, men and women, or boys and girls, will seek to replace what's missing in different ways, as different things appeal to them. And I think I want to try to present this in a way that's kind of self-obvious. Nature hates a vacuum, right? And so where there's an absence of family or stable family, there's going to be things that are missing. And let's take boys, for example. what appeals to a boy in family or appeals most. You can kind of see that in looking at what appeals to boys as they grow up, and especially boys in without stable families. Not that the only people that are interested in this are people without stable families, but it will strongly appeal to boys. Sports, right? High structure. Structure is a part of family that really appeals to boys. We like order. We like organization. Not that girls aren't organized, right? Don't hear me say that. But that appeals primarily, and you can see it in the things that boys are drawn to. So this sports is a team, and all the things that go with it, leadership and service and all the elements of a miniature society that a sports team is. Or it might be, as they get a little bit older, military, right? Same idea, same concept. High structure goals, victory, very tangible goals there, and leadership structures and service structures, tasks, all of that. The structure of the family is looking, and again, there's women in the military. This is not what we're saying, that women don't need structure. I'm saying that when something's missing in the family, men are more drawn to fill the void with the structure side of the family. Well, in a negative sense, then a lot of times those are filled with gangs, depending on where you're at. And I know when you hear me say that, I'm going to date myself here, but you hear me say something like Bloods and Crips, from the 80s and 90s. But whatever they're called now, whatever groups there are now, I don't know. But it can be informally. It can be just a small couple of kids that hang out and get in trouble. But even within that small kind of informal thing, there's going to be structures. There's going to be a leader. There's going to be kind of the enforcers. There's going to be the planners. There's going to be like all the elements of even the business world are going to be in that. What are we going to do? How are we going to get in trouble? And so that can be comforting, and a person can find us. I want to be a part of this structure. It's welcoming to me because I didn't have that, and so kids aren't just randomly getting into trouble. They're looking for something, and someone has taken advantage of that. Okay, so that's the structure, and that's the male side of things. So you see far more males get involved in those things than females, not exclusively, but you have the other side of family, and this will appeal more to females. Again, not exclusively. Illustrate this with a kind of an event that happened in Nazi Germany, and I don't remember all the details of this. I read this a long time ago. In Nazi Germany, there was an experiment that was done, and it was the idea behind it was to try to prove what language an infant would learn if they heard no language. Now, I'm going to guess. I don't know this, but I'm just going to guess that because it was Nazi Germany, they thought, well, Germany is the best and we're the Aryan nation and all that nonsense. So if an infant didn't hear any language, they would naturally just learn German because we're so superior. I would bet money that was the theory behind the study, but I don't know that. Well, anyway, so what happened was the way they set it up was they fed them, bathed them, they did whatever was necessary, what we would call the structure, right? The basic needs, the physical needs were taken care of, but they didn't speak to them, they didn't cuddle them, they didn't interact with them in any way, so that they wouldn't bias this study. And what was missing, what we would call nurture. And what language do you guess they learned? You'd probably guess that they learned no language, right? Well, actually, they all died. I don't know how many infants were in the study, but they all died, males and females. So it's not to say, again, that only females need nurture. That's not what we're saying. But nurture is a vital part of a family unit. whatever your family unit looks like. Well, this aspect of what's missing, it appeals more to the female who, the female child that does not have that family unit. They will seek to pursue the nurture side of things, positive or negative, right? And it doesn't mean that anyone that pursues these things has an absence of it. Like, we just look at, teachers. Teachers tend to be female, far more female teachers than males. Why? Well, it's a nurture thing. It appeals to them. And so, just like sports, not everybody that's in sports is a male, and not every male who's in sports has this really turbulent upbringing. But that just appeals to them. The structure appeals to them, and so nurture appeals to female. So when they're absent, they will draw themselves even more to it, and that can display as good things like teaching or whatever type of nursing things that those type of nurturing roles and environments they will be drawn to. Those are good. It can be also, much like the gangs with boys, it can be negative, where a girl may be drawn into filling nurturing needs with romantic relationships. And this can be for one of two reasons. It can be from the side of wanting to receive nurturing. It can also be where they act out what should have been performed for them by a family, where they will seek to nurture. And sometimes this displays as codependency. And again, I understand that males can be codependent. That's not what I'm saying. And there are studies, I don't agree with the studies that say that boys score just as high on codependency as girls. I believe that there is a bias with those studies, and I want to illustrate that. I'm not a scientist, but I do have eyeballs, and I have observed a lot of things. If you see a person who is showing what we would call typical codependency, it will be a female. Typical codependency will be just a couple of examples. Typical codependency will be where a person is dating another person who's kind of a troubled soul, right? A troubled soul who needs fixing, needs healing, needs nurturing, to bring out the best in them, right? You even look at movies. Every movie displays that as a female, right? It's always a female doing that, because it mirrors life. It's realistic. Life. If you know somebody in a relationship like that, you likely know a female who is using a troubled male in a codependent way. If you have a parent, a parent who will kind of invent sicknesses in even spouses or children to take care of them and feel like they're doing something and being valid. You're picturing right now, even if you know somebody like that, you're probably picturing a female. It's not to say that men don't do it, and it's not to say that men don't need nurture, but the nurturing side of a family really appeals more to the female. Right? It's just the fact. We are made different. Who knew? And so from whether it be structure or nurture, we develop our agendas so that when things are missing, I'm going to pursue. I'm going to structure my life to gain something. And it doesn't just mean me, but it might mean the things that I want to instill in other people. These I think are valuable. I didn't have these. I want you to have them. So the danger that we run into is the danger of pursuing things as an end that we are lacking. In other words, I didn't have this, and this is the ultimate goal. I need this. Let me give you an illustration of this completely on a different topic. If you think of your grandparents probably had a very stable life, depending on your age group. So my grandparents died a few years ago. They were in their 90s. So, World War II generation. And they had their own house. He had built his own house. I barely remember him building his house while he was in his 50s, 40s, 50s, building a house that I remember as growing up. Furniture, decent cars, not great cars, but they had cars. And they had, it was consistent. Their life was always the same. Every time you went to the house, it looked the same, and it was stable. It was appealing to that, right? To the stable side of what we want. And so we are born especially as grandchildren, they're already in this state, and so it feels like this is what they've always been since they were born. They had this life, and so we don't see how they got that stuff. Well, back then they likely had other than a house, that they had to take out a loan for. They saved up money. They bought a car, and then they saved up more money and got a nicer car. Until they had a fairly stable life. They saved up. They bought a new couch. They saved up. All of the stuff they saved up for and bought with cash. But now, I like that. I like the stable. That is an end. I want that life. That's an ideal life. And so what a lot of people have done is they've said, well, I'm going to get that immediately. So we get out of college. We've got college debt. And because college is important. Now, that generation mostly didn't go to college. They just worked and saved up. So now I get out of college. I have college debt. I need a nice car, right? Because I want the nice car because that's stable and it looks stable. So now I have a car loan, and now I want a nice house. So instead of saving up money for a down payment, I get those wonderful first time buyer loans where you don't have to have much money. Boom, and I'm into a huge mortgage, and then I need furniture. I need everything, and I want it nice. So I whip out the credit cards, and we start getting nice stuff. Boom, boom, boom. Nice stuff, nice stereo, nice everything. And I build myself a stable life, except it's not stable because now I have massive amounts of debt that my grandparents never had. And so I'm not stable. I'm not really happy. Because why? Because I pursued the ends. I saw the ends of what my grandparents was. I did not pursue it in the same means that they pursued it. And so now, right, I have a different life than I was expecting. The average car debt of a household car debt, the average household car, I'm not even talking about mortgage, not even talking about college loans, $35,000 of car debt in a household. Your grandparents never had that, ever, not once. The average credit card debt is in a house that has credit cards. So if you just kind of cull out of society, those households that have credit cards, the average, meaning more or less, average $8,000 of credit card debt. Your grandparents never had that, ever. Right? So why is this? Because the ends now is so important. We've forgotten the means by which a stable life is formed. Well, so generations without stable, nurturing homes have suffered in self-image. We want the image of stability. We want all these things. We want self-esteem. And so when you don't have this, comes across as it has so many symptoms. Not just low self-esteem, but it can manifest as depression, on all sorts of different things. It displays as narcissism. We talked about codependency, even like what we call borderline personality. A lot of these things are controversial in that people will think that they do not exist. Now, some things might be overprescribed or overdiagnosed, I should say, but these are real things. And maybe they didn't exist in great quantities, in prior generations, but they exist now, and it's because of the family unit breakdown. These are realistic symptoms. They do exist. The problem is not, the controversial nature is not in whether they exist or not. It's in how they're treated, right? And how they're addressed. And so a world that has given up spirituality in a large part has understood that these are problems. But they are trying to address the ends rather than going through the right means, much like with the financial situation that we described with grandparents. And so what they say is, well, you have low self-esteem, you have all these issues relating to self-image. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on what's called affirmation. Affirmation is not a bad thing, but it's saying nice things about yourself. And I don't want to say that we shouldn't get rid of negative self-talk, right? Negative self-talk is destructive. It's dangerous. We want to get rid of that. And it's not bad to repeat true things to yourself. What is dangerous is in focusing on the affirmation as a means of generating self-image, self-esteem. And maybe we'll go into this deeper dive in a different podcast. But this is essentially using a self-worth credit card. And what I mean by that is that eventually the affirmations that we say to ourselves, like I'm important and I'm valuable, which you are valuable, but just repeating that over and over, all of that self-talk is eventually going to meet, I'm 40, I'm unemployed, I'm playing video games, and I'm in my grandma's basement or my mom's basement. And all the affirmations that you've made come due at that moment because it's not going to match what you see. What you feel and what you see are not going to match. And there's going to be this disconnect, and all of a sudden, your self-esteem is going to come crashing down because it's been based on fluff. It's been based on something that's not really tangible. And it's not bad to change our self-talk. We want to do that. But what we want to do is say, my self-talk needs to be based on substantive things. And those, we talked about how when we talked about identity last week, we talked about how the more core something is, the more substance it has, the more valuable, the more long-lasting it is. And the deepest part of you, the deepest part is the spiritual side of you, because the deepest part of you is the part that lives when your body's no longer here. If your value is attached to all that stuff, then when you don't have the stuff, then you don't have the self-worth. If your identity is attached to whatever superficial thing, then when you don't have it, you don't have self-worth. And so the spiritual side of things is going to be where the deepest part of your self-worth will come from, and the most stable self-worth. And this is why families are so important, because typically in families there is there's stability and there's proper values put into children, because there's more nurturing going on. So I want to leave you. I don't want to leave you with something negative. I want to leave you with something positive, obviously. And I hope that it's structured maybe a little bit negative, but I want to leave you with the positive thoughts of where self-image really comes from. And some of us, we're born into unstable situations or less stable situations, or varying degrees of that. Not everybody has a wonderful two-parent home in the suburbs and all that. That's kind of actually the minority of people. So I want to leave you with something to kind of start on this week, and that's to look at your agendas. What are my priorities? What am I trying to instill in myself and pursue in myself, based on my emotional needs or whatever I have, or for other people? What am I instilling in other people? Sometimes those are a reflection of what I would like in myself, and I don't feel it in myself, and so I'm going to try to project this into others. Am I focusing on the feel-good, nice statements and affirming everything? It might be well-intentioned, but it might not be long-term sustainable. If that bill comes due, does what I repeat to myself match reality? If it doesn't, right? Then there's something spiritual that needs to be addressed. And that's what I want for you this week, is to start matching, right? And start kind of comparing, contrasting the self-talk you have with the reality of the situation and focusing an emphasis on your spiritual health, and what where that's going to be addressed is going to be a connection with God. We use kind of the words spiritual in this really vacuous reference. I don't mean like sitting on the top of the mountain cross-legged in a lotus position. Spiritual means addressing your most center core of who you are, and who you are is what was made by God. And that's only going to be addressed when you understand your value within the framework of who you are made to be. So I really hope you have a good week, turning the page on some things, and listen to the podcast if you're watching. Watch it if you're listening. Try a different way, but like it, share it, because it's through doing this that more people can be positively affected. All right, have a good week.